Dane. That's how I always do it. I'll just riff it out, and then we'll figure it out on the back end.
You know, that's what concerns me about some of these episodes.
We'll piece this thing together one stitch at a time. How about that?
I would
love.
I would like for it to sound at least remotely rehearsed from time to time.
Maybe a little aggressive lust. So, Dane, you remember that television program, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader?
Yeah, it wasn't like Jeff Foxworthy. The host.
It was terrible. Yeah, it was definitely Jeff Foxworthy. Might have been the low of his career.
Look at the memory on this guy.
But God bless his little soul. He gave it his damnedest. Anyway, it turns out we're all woefully dumber than a 2-year-old. A 2-year-old that can't wipe her own bum.
We don't know that.
I'm assuming. Were you potty trained at 2? What year are you potty trained? I'm speaking out of hyperbole, obviously, Dane. Let me flow here. You're telling me a human being that can't drive is outscoring me on an IQ test? A 2-year-old in California became the first 2-year-old member of Mensa, which, yeah, I could imagine. So one of two things happened. Either
because I didn't know. I'm not. Everybody's not. Can you explain for the audience what
basically
Mensa is?
To become a Mensa member from the 2 seconds of
it's not like a club, just a classification.
Yeah, I guess so. They don't like meet up and decide the fate of the world,
right?
Or fight.
Or maybe they do.
Or fight supervillains. wait, and if they do, they're gonna be hold on. We can't do anything yet. The 2-year-old's not here. She hasn't pedaled her little Tykes car all the way down here like Fred Flintstone.
Tell the people what a Mensa is.
A member of Mensa is somebody that scores over 150 on an IQ test.
Okay.
So either her dad snuck in and took the IQ test for her and has been studying like a banshee for it. Or option B, or her mom. Fair. I was going to say that women are the fairer sex, so they would never engage in such lies and immoral platitudes, but whatever. Or someone's pissing on our foot and telling us it's raining.
David,
can she tie a tie, Dane?
I don't know. Is that an IQ? That's the thing. I don't even feel like.
Have you ever taken an IQ test?
Hold on. I don't think so. And I also just don't even feel qualified to comment on this because
the only tests I remember taking,
I don't know whether an IQ test is any more useful than a Myers-Briggs.
The only test that I've ever taken is which superhero are you? And I always end up as some like Green Arrow, like some bullshit. Like I wanted to be Batman. I wanted to be Batman.
That's exactly what you did.
And I answered so I go back and I retake it and I answer all the questions better, and then they're like, "You're Batman." I was like, "I knew that from the start, dipshit." I am the Bat. Anyway, not important. What is important is that we are both woefully underpowered mentally compared to this 2-year-old.
Or, as you said, what's going on, David?
They're pissing on our feet and telling us it's coming down like a banshee out there. And I've said banshee twice.
I think that's a good jumping off point for the episode.
Are we going to play with that today?
I think we are.
Okay.
All right, let's jump in. Welcome to Weapons of Meme Destruction Podcast, episode 45, which can be found at wmdpodcast.com/45. It can also be found on YouTube.
I love how you say that every time. I love how you have to tell them /45. Like, if you want to find, we should screw with them one time and be like, if you want to find episode 64, you have to look up episode 46, get to minute marker 36, and there's going to be an attachment that you have to press on at exactly the right second, and then it'll take you to episode 64. We have to make it really complicated. Because it's so ridiculous. Like, yeah, of course, if they want to see episode 45, you type in 45. It just seems silly that we have to say it. We have to say it.
We do have to say it.
We have to say it. Because we're not the 2-year-old that's a member of Mensa, but definitely.
Or this is like the lettering above the door on the plane that says "Do not open in flight." Like,
just in case.
It's silly that we gotta
in
say it.
In case you were thinking, that goes back to like every sign is there for a reason. Because at one point there was just some guy that like, I'm gonna take a smoke break, guys. Anybody want anything while I'm outside? And then all of a sudden, Flight 492 splashes into the Great Pacific Blue because somebody didn't put a sign that said "Don't open the door."
Okay. Anyway, already detouring. We haven't even.
Sorry.
We haven't even.
So sorry. Jesus. It just hit me like a Mack truck. I was like, 45.
Anyway,
of course you look for 45 when you're looking.
You can find us on YouTube, where you will also be able, by the way, to find recordings of our Wednesday live sessions that we do on the Stereo app, which you can also join. Just download the Stereo app on your phone and join us every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. But you can also link up with us at all forms of social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Just search Weapons of Meme Destruction.
Slide up in them dims.
Yeah.
Just be carping all them dims, you know?
But please, no genitalia pics.
Speak for yourself, Dane. Whatever genitalia you want to present, I'll look at it. I will judge it. Just make sure it's in presentable fashion. Not in some kind of cockamamie smushed. I don't want to be trying to make out what it is.
Yeah, let's not
be definitive.
Let's not paint any pictures.
Let's be definitive.
Let's get into the episode. So, David, you brought up a good point in the pre-show, or not a good point, just like a talking point, which I think a lot of things going on lately are kind of emblematic of this.
Good word.
I know. I think that's the word for the day. Is don't piss on my foot and tell me it's raining.
That is the phrase of the day.
Right.
That's what we'll probably call
it. That is the phrase of the day. And a lot of things, and let's just get this out of the way up front. David and I are just as tired of talking about COVID as you probably are of hearing it.
We literally spent like 30 minutes scouring
trying to
the
find
news. Like, can anything. We please talk about something? I was like,
don't short sell us, David. We
Dane, did you hear about this 2-year-old? Did you hear about this 2-year-old in Cali? He's like, oh, geez. Like, that's the best I got.
At least it's not COVID.
Yeah.
But so we're going to keep the COVID points brief, but a lot of things have been coming out of the COVID hysteria that are, like I said, emblematic of this pissing on my foot, telling me it's raining thing. And we have some other examples too, but we're just going to point some out for you. You probably already know what some of them are.
By the way,
like I said, go find us on all those platforms I just mentioned and drop in the comments something we missed or clarify something that we talked about.
Just for funsies, we didn't do this pre-show, but just think about like if the world was run like they ran it during COVID-19, just apply that to like the Black Plague. What would the world have looked like if the hysteria that was applied to COVID-19 was then applied to something that killed a third of Europe's population?
I mean, I think it was. Everybody was terrified of the Black Death. What are you talking about?
But my point being is like, yeah, like you caught the Black Plague on Monday. By Wednesday, they were throwing you on a cart to have your body burned.
Bring out your dead.
I'm not dead.
Yes, he is.
He says he's not dead. I'll be stone dead in a moment. I don't want to go on the cart. Oh, don't be such a baby. Anyway, Monty Python aside, like the thing that terrifies me is that when there's going to be an actual crisis that will wipe out a third of the world's population, and it could happen in our lifetimes.
Yeah, and another...
the powers that be mishandled this thing, which was like, again, not to poo-poo the COVID thing, and all of the deaths were tragedies, yada,
when
yada,
you compare it with a 33% death rate.
Right.
Disease.
It was a softball. Yeah. It was a softball pitch right down the middle, and they still hacked away at it for 3 strikes and had to walk back to the dugout. Like, they didn't even do the bare minimum of leading during this time.
Yeah, and I think another important thing and keep this in mind for if something doesn't even need to be virus related, but let's just say some sort of existential crisis happens in the future. Keep in mind is it a fable or a parable? Either way, it doesn't matter. The boy who cried wolf. That's exactly, I think, kind of the point that you're making there, is that they fumbled COVID so bad where all eyes were on the experts. They were, okay, how are they going to handle this? How are they going to protect us? How are they going to keep us safe? And they screwed it up so bad, and they created so much hysteria that if, God forbid, something as lethal as something like the Black Death comes along in the future, people are going to be like, I don't believe these dipshits. And I mean, at that point, are you going to blame them? It's the boy who cried wolf scenario. Right. If everything's a hysterical existential crisis, then when the eventual existential crisis actually happens, everybody's going to be like, fuck those guys. Right. And honestly, you can't blame them.
I mean, I couldn't hold a candle to that. I've never seen so many people blame something and move goalposts as much as I've seen this, because they'd come out with the science on Monday, and then by Thursday, the science was different, and they wouldn't say, hey, we made a mistake. It would just be, well, we didn't know. It's like, well, then if you don't know, don't come out and say it. Like when they thought that Fauci was Saint Fauci, when he came out and said, you know what, masks don't really work, just stay at home, don't do anything, you don't need masks, just stay at home and stay away from people. And he comes out 2 months later, or 2 weeks later, and says, yeah, I knew that masks would work, but I didn't want to have a shortage for the important people. So I told you all a lie, and it was for the greater good. It's like, okay, so you were willing to lie to us on that subject. What are you also willing to lie on us? But then everybody that was on his side said that he was doing it for the altruistic reasons. And everybody on the right, the other side, we'll just say the other side.
Yeah.
Whoops, Freudian slip. Said that it was, well, you can't trust him ever again. Blah, blah. I was like, no, he just showed that he knew something that we didn't, and he withheld information. And therefore, I don't have to demonize him, but I definitely don't have to take every word that comes out of his mouth.
He's definitely worth demonizing at this point.
At that point, no. I'm referring back to that.
Oh, yes.
At that point, no. But I definitely don't have to believe everything that comes out of his mouth. I'm going to critically think here and said, okay, you've already admitted that you lied to us. Everything you're going to say after this time, is going to be taken with a huge grain of salt. And I'll make my own decisions off of that.
Yeah. So, here's just a quick run through of the list of pissing on your foot, telling you it's raining things from COVID. I mean, the two big obvious ones are the mask mandates and the lockdowns. If I don't care which side, and let's also just lead off with this. It is a terrible travesty that a virus was politicized to the point that you now have people saying, no, I'm going to leave my mask on because I don't want to be confused with the Republican or with the Trumper or whatever. And then, you have the other side, politicizing it in its own way. Like, that's a problem that I would hope everybody could agree on.
And just see the photos of Gavin Newsom at the French Laundry and the new photos of the governor of Minnesota?
Yeah, Gretchen Whitmer.
That were setting laws and rules for you specifically to adhere to, and then she goes, and then they both go out and violate their own rules and have all the excuses in the world for it.
Right, bad actors all over the place. But bad actors aside, no matter which side of the fence you're on, if you just look at the raw data straight from the CDC at the difference in jurisdiction between mask policies of how drastic they were when they went into place, and overlay that with when the cases happened, when the deaths happened, when things spiked, when they went down, it is a literal shotgun plot on a graph. There is no correlation. There is no causality. There is absolutely zero empirical evidence whatsoever to draw the conclusion that masks did anything to slow down the spread or protect people or whatever the case may be. Now, that's just the raw data. And if you don't believe us, and we'll put this in the show notes at wmdpodcast.com/45. we'll put a little quiz in the show notes there, and it's at the website covidchartsquiz.com. And basically how this little website works, it's some interactive graphs where it takes away the states and it takes away the dates, and it says, and you see the spikes and all that kind of stuff, and it says, where on this graph did the mask mandate go into place? And you click on the graph, and chances are you're going to get every single one of them wrong. Or when did the lockdowns go into effect? You'll get it wrong. It'll give you 10 states and it'll say which one of these states imposed lockdowns and when. You'll get it wrong. All we're saying is if those policies in true piss on my foot telling me it's raining fashion, if those policies actually worked, you would see something in the data. Something. You would be able to pinpoint, yeah, I think the masks went in about here because obviously cases fell off a cliff. Or the lockdown went into place here because cases and deaths fell off a cliff. But it's literally a shotgun plot. There is no causation, let alone correlation. So if you're being objective and just looking at the data, that was a classic piss on my foot. Tell me it's raining thing, because those policies did nothing except destroy lives.
The only thing that remained constant during those periods was the narrative from both sides. That was it. From what you were hearing from the left media and what you were hearing from the right, that's all that's remained constant. Everything else was like you said, a shotgun chart. Like there was no rhyme nor reason, and they try to make every correlation, but then a month later, everything that they just said last month was flipped on its head, and all the states that were supposed to explode with COVID were doing great, or not great, but they were middle of the pack. Meanwhile, all the states that did everything that they were supposed to do were exploding, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So there was.
And I mean, we've said this on numerous episodes before, but we live in Florida, and Florida throughout this whole thing, because it was one of the first states to open up in late September of 2020, it was supposed to be, the death capital of the United States, if not the world, right? Because we're a global vacation destination with a disproportionately large population of old people who are most at risk.
Which gives us the moniker of God's waiting room.
Yeah. And college kids coming down, partying on the beach. So we had the national championship game, we had the Super Bowl, we had 2 spring breaks, and each one of these events was supposed to be some kind of cataclysmic super spreader where there were just going to be body bags lining the streets.
Not to mention our governor opening up the beaches on national holidays too, by the way.
And it never happened. It never materialized. Florida is a middle of the pack state. I think it's like 27th in the country in terms of cases, deaths, in the metrics. It's right there in the middle. And there are some states like Michigan that are worse than it. Like California is California is within like 1 or 2 of Florida, and it locked down the heaviest, masked the longest, all the works. And what I'm saying is like no reasonably objective person is looking at that reality and thinking, you know what? I think these guys had it figured out. They were telling us the truth the whole time. They were trying their best, and they actually had some impact on limiting the spread. They didn't. None of it worked. Analogy. But your lives were ruined for it.
Perfect analogy. I don't know if most of our listeners were alive long enough to remember these things, but did you guys ever have air raid drills in your school? Because I remember like the first 2 years of my school, like grades 1 and 2, they'd have like tornado drills where we were, but they would have you enact like if this was a nuclear attack or if there's a bombing run or something like that. They had you all get under your desks and cradle yourself. That's the same thing. Like there's nothing you can really do in a nuclear attack if the bombs dropped right on your head. But it's like, well, just do this and it's better than doing nothing. Like, so you'll at least feel all the way up into the moments where you're vaporized that you did something. Instead of sitting there waiting for your inevitable fate, praying to whatever God you pray to.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing, David.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Like it puts your mind in like a bottle.
It does. So, moving on to another COVID-related, piss on my foot, tell me it's raining kind of scenario, the relief. So after their policies, or in the middle of, and when I say there, I mean, the experts, the intelligentsia, the ones that, if it wasn't for those grand wizards up in DC, dictating our 320 million lives, we'd all just be, aimless boobs wandering off of, piers and stuff like that, to our death. But
meanwhile,
anyway,
these are the same people that can't figure out emails and how to CC people on them and not CC other people. But keep going, Dane. Yes.
Yeah. So in the middle of their massive policy failures, as you may recall, they passed a couple relief bills. One estimate is that all the relief bills combined total to about $42,000 extra debt for each federal taxpayer. So, hope we got something good for all that money. Turns out we didn't, and we've hit this on some previous episodes about the fraud that those COVID relief bills were susceptible to the tune of billions of dollars that the government lost in taxpayer dollars because the government just, if there's one thing that it doesn't do, it's due diligence on anything, except for, if you break its rules and they want to lock you in a cage. They'll do enough diligence on that to put you away. But to really help you, no due diligence whatsoever.
If they can make monetary value off of you, yes. And then for the listener that's thinking like, guys, come on. We're not even going to feel those effects until like maybe 5-10 years down the road. And by then you won't even know it because the economy will be back and running and so on and so forth. Have you paid any attention to the price of fuel lately? Have you paid any attention to the price of lumber, steel? Have you paid any attention to, and this should hit you right at home no matter who the hell you are because we all got to eat, groceries? Have you paid any attention to the price of meat, to the price of vegetables, to the price of produce, to the price of anything?
David, do you mean to tell me that when a government decides to print 20% of all of the bills that have ever existed in its entire nation's history within a calendar year, that might have some impact on the cost of consumer goods, that might hit the little guy and the middle class guy and the pocketbook a little harder than the big guy?
Yeah, and then also, I mean, doesn't that kind of make sense why they would have to, zhuzh up how dangerous this thing was to keep you locked down to be able to do said things? To correlate the amount of inflation they just inflicted upon their society, they can't come back out and be like, all right, sorry guys, we messed up. This thing wasn't as dangerous as we said it was. We made a huge mistake. We're all going to have to figure out how to get out of this inflation.
Yeah, but you might be sitting there, listener, saying, but David, I got stimmy checks, bro. The government gave me money. So at the end of the day, they helped me. Well, let's talk a little bit about the fraud, waste, and abuse in those stimulus bills that aren't such a big help to you. And that even if we do take your stimmy checks into account, the increased prices in consumer goods you're going to be paying over the next God knows how long is going to more than eat up any alleged benefit that you perceive from that. So there was a recent expose by ProPublica who looked at some of the fraud in terms of giving stimulus relief to farms. And it found that in Orange County, New Jersey, that place with a bunch of beach houses and, urban development and not a whole lot of farmland. Yeah, there were farms such as Ritter Wheat Club, Dealey Nuts, Tomato Cramber, and Seaweed Bleeman that, got COVID relief from the bill. But problem is none of them existed. And it gets weirder. Like there were potato farms, per the application, potato farms in Palm Beach County, Florida. Potatoes, Florida. Does that add up to you?
We know you're not all farmers.
There were orange groves in Minnesota.
Now, if that doesn't hit home with you, I don't know what the hell. You don't have to be an agriculturalist. You don't have to be a farmer with your hands dirty from toiling in the soil all day to realize that oranges that are known to be grown in Florida,
in tropical environments,
perhaps. not temperate zones. The coconut is tropical. Oh, this is a temperate zone.
Now you're confusing them with coconuts. You can't change the...
Well, things that grow in tropical zones don't usually grow in temperate zones, which is what Monty Python was driving
Suffice it to say, if you had a potato farm in Palm Beach or you had an orange grove in Minnesota, you're not going to be super profitable.
Flip those two, we might be able to buy it a little bit. It might be a little less auspicious, but you didn't, and it looks real sus, as they would say. On the 9 gags, on the Reddits,
is anybody surprised at the brainiacs that decided that, roughly $10 trillion of stimulus didn't do enough due diligence to figure out that maybe orange groves don't belong in Minnesota?
These guys are the literal Pink Panthers of financial fraud. They'll never see it here, right out in front of their noses.
But that's what's hilarious. The fraudsters got away with it. It worked. Now, I don't mean got away with it as in didn't get prosecuted. I don't know. Maybe some of these people were found. Maybe they weren't. But the point is, they got away with it to the tune of the fact that the government gave them a bunch of money for non-existent farms. Like the ones that I mentioned in New Jersey, some of those farms, the people, the application that they used to fill out to the government on their COVID relief loans, they were using addresses for residential houses. They're like, oh yeah, I'm, to use a Miami address, they're saying, oh yeah, I'm at 1345 Brickell Avenue. I have a huge farm. It's like downtown middle of Miami. It's like, I got a huge farm there. Can I get some money?
Hey guys.
Government's like, nah, we're not gonna put this address into Google and see where it's at. Couldn't even be bothered to do it. Just write the check. We don't care.
It's
yeah. So anyway,
these are the people that we are trusting with our health and safety. And Dane, speaking of health and safety, what's the next point?
Yes. So if they weren't pissing on our foot and telling it was raining in terms of their mask mandates and lockdowns, and they were doing it in terms of quote unquote their relief, let's get to the real crux of the matter. But they're just humble public servants, and they're trying the best they can possibly do to look out for your health and safety. These are public health professionals. Well, you're never going to guess. They were pissing on our foot and telling it was raining again.
I mean, I know it's not a popular subject to bring up, but COVID deaths were still third ranked, and I think we've brought this up on the podcast a couple of times. It still paled in comparison throughout the annual numbers of mortality rates in the United States, at least. I don't to privy it. Heart disease still number 1, and cancer still at number 2. Heart disease was 656 again, 1,000, and cancer, I think it was somewhere like 500K, and then
which is where COVID's sitting at about now.
About
it's a bit north of 500K.
Right, a little north now, but it took a year and a couple of months.
Right.
So, if it's really for your health and safety, why is our insurance problem, or why is our insurance system so broken? Why is the biggest epidemic in this country, even with COVID being around, obesity? And why are you still telling me that you care about my health when these supercomputers that cracked COVID-19, which was supposedly a disease that we had never seen before, even though we had the antibodies of all the other ones, was plugged into a supercomputer, and 6 months later we got a vaccine? Why have we not cured cancer yet? Or why have we not even cured AIDS yet?
Well, and speaking on that ranking that you just had, in episode 36, COVID-19 Donuts, Not 16 Candles, we talked about the just blatant kind of hypocrisy or irony, maybe, of the fact that, you had companies offering, get your Krispy Kreme donuts in exchange for proof of your vaccination. If that isn't the most American thing I've ever seen, it's like, put something in your body that is going to do damage to your body, but it's okay because you got a drug from a pharmaceutical company, and that's really all you need to quote unquote be healthy. Like, that is the American way.
Or option B, it's if anything, that should have been demeaning to the American public, because we're not a fucking 6-year-old after he got his booster shot that got a lollipop. Like, if you got this shot and you're an adult, you got the shot for the betterment of you. You don't need incentive. You don't need other incentives to get the shot. If you're concerned about your health, get it. If you're not, don't.
Or maybe I don't feel like we're asking for too much, but I'll even ask for less than what we've already asked for. If you are going to give an incentive,
here's a sprig of broccoli. Eat this shit, you'll be fine.
If you are going to give an incentive, maybe not give the incentive that directly contributes to the number one comorbidity that coincided with deaths of COVID. I think
just
it was something
an idea.
Like 72% of all
78.
patients who died from it. Okay, 78.
Hospitalizations.
Okay, were overweight or obese. So, I mean, maybe at least think a little bit more about the messaging in terms of whatever your incentive is to get people to get the
science.
vaccine.
Okay, it's the science. We follow it.
And listen, all of those, yes, we can sit here all day long and say, well, this thing kills more people and we should be more focused on that or whatever. And you might say, well, Dane, well, David, that doesn't mean that just because one
circumstance.
Just because 1 and 2 are worse, don't mean you don't also focus on number 3 when it's preventable. Okay, we hear you.
Fine.
However, we would raise you the fact that not only do these policies not account for those other things, they actually directly contributed to more deaths. And remember Cuomo's little thing early on in COVID where he's like, if it saves one life, it's worth it. Well, Mr. Cuomo, I have a question for you about what'd you say it was, David? 83,000 extra deaths of despair as a result of the lockdowns?
Roughly, yes.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, 4% on the usual norm for this country.
Right. So the one life that Cuomo saved in terms of his lockdowns, let's set aside the 10,000 extra old people that his policies killed in New York. We'll set that aside for a second. And we'll just focus on the 83,000 extra deaths of despair. And those are classified as deaths from, generally self-inflicted from being depressed. So things like substance abuse, domestic violence, substance use, same thing, a suicide, these kind of deaths because you're sad and depressed because you're locked down and you don't have any social contact with friends and family.
Or maybe you lost your business because they wouldn't allow you to open it up and sell your goods.
Right. Or, going back to David's list, what was number 2 on the list? Cancer. Well, we're now seeing, which many experts predicted in March and April of 2020, is that cancer is going to go through the roof because, you'll never guess, regular routine cancer screenings are elective procedures. And when they had the hospitals locked down because they were overflowing, they weren't overflowing, you couldn't get your regular cancer screenings because those were elective procedures.
And by the way,
so a bunch of people have gone on for 12 months with cancer growing in their bodies that they could have caught early and dealt with, that they won't, and now those people are going to die. That's not going to show up on some little convenient COVID roll like COVID deaths, but make no mistake, those are deaths that are directly attributable to the policies instituted for alleged public health.
Like we said, with that, and just to backtrack to that hospital overflow, I thought the initial lockdown of 2 weeks was for them to set up emergency shelters that were going to be a impromptu emergency center for COVID patients, for hospital overflow, so that it can be ready for all the people that have to have these beds. Mm-hmm. How many articles did you see about these urgent care, immediate erected facilities that they were supposed to be building during those 2 weeks? How many of them did you hear about? How many did they erect? They never said anything about them because they didn't erect them. And then,
the one they did a couple. The ones they did, they didn't even use. Like they built, I think, a $5 million facility in Houston, Texas, and never saw a patient.
And wouldn't you think that they'd want to reward you a little bit for willingly going under lockdown for 2 weeks to build those things. Like, look at all the lives you saved by that small sacrifice that you made.
Here's your life back, citizen.
Never mind the fact that it stretched into a year and a half of lockdown. Never mind that. And you never saw one CNN report or one Fox News report or one MSNBC report from any of these emergency erected hospital facilities. I haven't seen them. So who's to blame now? Oh, are you going to go out and yell at your neighbor for walking outside and mowing his lawn without a mask on? He's the guy that was to blame for all those hospital overflows that we've seen? Is he the guy or is it the government again?
Everybody that doesn't follow the rules is a one-man walking super spreader.
Exactly. Now your neighbor is the enemy, not the incompetence in Washington.
Right.
D.C.
Yeah. So, again, don't tell us it's about public health when you clearly don't care about the things that kill more people and your policies directly contribute to other deaths. But I guess those don't matter as much because they're not COVID deaths. But with that brief aside, we're done talking about COVID for the episode.
Oh, God.
I'm glad we didn't spend too much time of the episode on COVID.
Oh, God. Like, what was that, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Good.
A couple more. So, and, just to kind of zoom out because, yes, we understand we have COVID fatigue just like you do.
And you might be saying, Dane and David, this is an unprecedented event that happened.
Yeah.
Like, the government had to react this way because they needed to do something emergently, and they just did what they thought was best for us. There's never been another situation in American history that has been like this, ever. Right, Dane?
Right. Well, I guess that would be a fair conclusion for you to reach if you were a non-Mensa 2-year-old.
Right. Like, if
we would accept that level of naivety from a child.
If you were still wearing Mommy Wow, I'm a big kid now, Pampers, we would accept that as an answer. Like, listen, little kid, I know you're a genius. You're gonna grow up and you're gonna be able to move shit with your brain. But you got that one wrong because you haven't been alive long enough yet. You haven't seen the world and you haven't studied history yet because you're too busy working on your addition tables.
Yeah. So in terms of, I don't know, just a few existential crises at random before we settle on kind of the more macro one that we focus on a lot, because as libertarians, kind of the whole empire, the warfare state is kind of our big issue. Just a few crises at random. I can't think of. Well, there was that whole stock market crash in 1929, which the government stepped in to fix and then exacerbated for another 10 years. Or wait a minute.
Exacerbated or exasperated?
Exacerbated, as in made it worse.
That's a word?
Yes. Exacerbate is a word. Exasperate is flustered.
I thought that's what I do every night before I go to bed. Continue.
Okay. Only made it worse and dragged it out for 10 years. Or there's that whole thing about, money. That's kind of important to a nation and economy. So the central planners said, we're going to establish a Federal Reserve. And over the next 100 years, our price target is to devalue this thing by 97%. Good job, guys. Or what about the war on drugs? That's a pretty epidemic level situation. We definitely want the experts in control of that one. Yet they can't even keep drugs out of their own federal prisons. Or I would say terrorism is a pretty big, spooky, scary thing, right, David? So what did we get from terrorism? Well, we got the Patriot Act that said, well, in order for you to be a good American citizen, you need to stop being an American citizen, meaning all of your rights and liberties out the window. We can spy on you, suspend the Fourth Amendment at will, and all of this is in the name of safety because we're going to get terrorists. By the way, we're going to stop dangerous things from happening.
By the way, we went across the world and started bombing other countries and blowing up buildings and killing, and started doing all these other things to a lot of other people because a group of terrorists hit our buildings. But the war that we started wasn't with the war, or wasn't with the country that was harboring the people that elicited the
we just
attack.
kind of metastasized quickly.
Correct. Like they just wanted to go someplace and bomb things. They just wanted to go someplace and just like
do things.
It's like when you get smacked in the face, you just turn around and throw wild. It's like, okay, but we all knew that you shouldn't. And everyone else is like, hey, I think it was the first time in all the world where they're like, hey, don't do this. This is like, that's clearly not the country. Like there's a little more nuance to this. Nope, it was them. Like, and then by the way, Dane, that was a quick war, right? Just like Desert Storm, in and out.
Yeah, in and out, done. You know, all the wounds from that war have healed. I believe so. Yes. Right.
Yeah, and then again, after that really quick war was over, when the veterans came home that were injured and blown apart, we took really good care of them.
Yes.
Top notch treatment.
VA's awesome. People definitely don't die out in the parking lot waiting on service. That never happens. The
government makes sure that if we send you overseas and you fight for freedom and you come back, you'll be given a hero's welcome.
You're treated like a king.
You will get the same treatment as the people that sent you to that war in the first place.
Yeah. I think that is the history of America and warfare.
Yep.
I believe so.
Okay.
And then there's the whole matter of getting into the wars in the first place.
So we're the crazy ones.
The foreign policy never changes. The establishment's always the same. As I think this is a Tom Woods law. No matter who you vote for, you always wind up with John McCain because, the foreign policy establishment in D.C. has never seen a war they didn't like. Regime change here? Yep, let's do it. Regime change there? Not a bad idea. Regime change over there? This is something we haven't tried before, right? Yeah, let's go for it. Regime change. And what do we wind up with? For every one terrorist, allegedly, we kill, we get, 5 to 7 more. And yet the madness just goes on and on and on. And the whole time they're telling you, we're definitely not pissing on your foot. We are definitely making the world a safer place, not more unsafe.
Dane, just for recollection's sake, who put Saddam Hussein in power again?
I believe, yes, checking notes, the United States.
And who trained Osama bin Laden in counterterrorism and terrorism?
I'm going to go with option A, United States.
Oh, so are you saying that we keep making our own problems that come back to roost?
It would seem that way.
Huh. So maybe we should stop fucking with other countries and just work on this one?
Perhaps.
Maybe for a second? Maybe we should just focus on making sure that America is
But
good
David,
and
that
solid.
would require us to come to the understanding that it truly is not raining on us. That the ones in power in Washington, D.C. aren't pissing on all of our collective feet.
Footsies. Tootsies. Well, I've got these piss-soaked boots over here, but thank God it's pouring outside.
There's a lot of peeing and not a whole lot of raining going on.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like they really care about whether or not we're safe. But good thing for all those people that got the jab, so that they're a little bit safer.
Yeah, I mean, again, unless you're a 2-year-old Mensa, we're not going to forgive you anymore. After episode 45, we're putting our feet down and our non-piss covered feet down. You cannot claim naivety or ignorance of American history and how the U.S. government handles quote unquote crises in terms of your and my and our neighbor's best interests. We're not going to allow you to be naive about that anymore. We're just not.
We will allow for willful ignorance. We will allow you to say, well, it might not have been good, but thank God the other guys weren't in power because they would have made a bigger mess of it than we did. Like, no, someday you'll wake up and realize that you just voted for the the bowl of shit that had the red wrapping paper around it instead of the blue wrapping paper around it. It's the same thing. Like you said, the Tom Woods thing, you always get John McCain. Like, they can tell you vehemently that they have your best interest in mind. But I can tell you through my heart of hearts, if you've ever been inspired, and I might have said this on the podcast before, if you've ever been inspired or emotionally moved by a politician's speech, I have pity on you. I have nothing but pity on you because you, my dear friend, are bought and paid for. You have drank the Kool-Aid. You have the purple blanket over your head waiting for the Hale-Bopp comet to take you home. You have gone past the point of critical thinking.
I would only offer a friendly amendment when you say any politician, because I think the substance of what, quote unquote, you're being inspired by matters. So, for example, when a Ron Paul says something like, we need to end the Fed or end the war on drugs or end the wars overseas because the ones that are calling those shots don't have anybody's best interest in mind. Basically, everything we're saying on this episode is that the ones in power don't have your best interest in mind. And that if you're going to do the best you can possibly do in your life, it has to be left up to you.
But what emotional evaluation would you need? Would you need to be emotionally moved by that speech? What I'm talking about is when the people come out and say that I'm on your side.
Right. But what I'm saying is it's
the appeal to ethos.
Maybe what I'm saying is when a politician, because I'm not saying that Ron Paul is the only one that did this, but when a politician leaves you with the message that you are the power, you, the individual, you have control of your own destiny in this country, at least for now. That is so rare and out of character for like the politicians I think you're referring to of give me the power, I'll take care of you, you know, hope and dreams and faith and blah, blah, blah.
Maybe
blah, blah.
We can tie this whole episode up with one. If you're being appealed to emotionally, that's them taking a warm, frothy,
don't do it,
steamy piss on your feet and telling you
that's where you went with it.
That it's absolutely raining outside.
Yes.
That's all we're saying.
So, if you don't want to get your feet peed on,
I certainly don't like piss-covered feet myself.
And if you want to stop as many of your friends and family's feet from being peed on, then you need to go to WMDpodcast.com/45 and share that with friends and family. Get us on any podcast catcher. Just search for Weapons of Meme Destruction. Go to episode 45 or, start at the beginning. Listen to the first 44. Find us on YouTube and engage with us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Those are the places you find us.
And stereo.
That's where you listen to this episode. Yes, and Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, join us on stereo for a live discussion. And the topic of that day will just be, watch the social medias and we'll tell you.
There you go.
So with that, we sign out, hoping, praying, wishing that your feet are dry and cozy.
And that this was a learning moment.
With dry, cozy feet.